Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
This is the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. This is the show that has been designed for you who work in and around PLM. Every week we bring to this show interesting interviews to help you grow your career and come up with ideas that can help you thrive. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every week with Craig Brown. Now, Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors, and today Craig is also the featured guest on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Hey, Craig, welcome to the show as a guest.
Well, thanks, Tom. I'm looking forward to it. I have to think about my answers, I guess. This will be interesting. I'm on the other side of the table today, so that'll be good.
So Craig's whole career has been all things related to computers, both inside and outside of products, whether it's something that runs on the inside or helps you build those products. He's of the generation where computers became omnipresent and everything changed. He started his career with a degree in aerospace engineering and then worked his way up and finished his career full-time working for General Motors as the PLM leader. And now in his early retirement, he is helping other companies. So Craig, tell us a little bit about your career that sums it up better than what I just did.
Well, Tom, that was pretty good. I got fascinated with computers in college, and especially flight computers that control spacecraft. And that's kind of what led me to my degree. And it also led me to wondering, what it was all about. And so I had the good fortune as a co-op student while in engineering school to work with the guys that worked on the Apollo spacecraft. And they did the guidance systems for the aircraft that landed on the moon. And so I got all this firsthand exposure to, wow, these computers, and by the way, for everybody, that's a really long time ago. Those computers weren't digital, they were analog. And so the whole history of how we went from that to these powerful phones we put in our hands today, and they're not only a communication device or a web browser, they're also an AI machine learning device that's collecting information about your usage patterns and where you are. And so this omnipresence of computers, it's just amazing to me, and I've been in the middle of it, of how inexpensive it's become to have computers everywhere. And then how do you use those computers to make better and better products, which is what product lifecycle management's all about. So I think the common interest in my career has been computers. We didn't have computer engineering degrees when I graduated. Aerospace engineers by their training are very systems oriented because we're balancing between electrical and mechanical and chemical and all kinds of other things. It's surprising to some, but there actually are a handful of aerospace engineers in the car companies. They tend to be in the simulation areas and in the areas that do this higher level systems engineering.
So it's not just for car. It's not just for cars that go fast as a rocket.
No, it's also for cars that are efficient, and now cars that won't at least pollute with carbon dioxide. Now there's still the whole life cycle you should think about, which is the manufacturing of batteries and motors, and make sure they are also green, if you will. But you couldn't get to where we are today without computers following Moore's law. They get cheaper and more powerful at the same time. There's very few technologies that are like that. And then the other thing with computers is, well, a lot of engineering jobs, from drafting a design to calculating key forces to running a laboratory test to confirm your assumptions about the design. Well, once you had computers to help automate, in many cases, all of those jobs, well, then the question becomes, what do you do with this power? And more recently, things like machine learning and AI. The premise for AI has been with us for a long time, decades. We just needed cheap enough computers to make it economically feasible. And now it's here. And of course, it's also being used in ways maybe we didn't expect, which is a whole nother interview for another day.
I was going to say, that's a whole other podcast, Craig.
Yeah. And maybe I'm not the right one to interview about that, but I have strong opinions about it, but to be fair, I'm just another citizen who's wondering where this is all going, right?
Well, today, I thought we would talk about why it's a good idea and helpful to be involved in your industry and different industry associations, standard groups, and sort of private think tank type groups that people put together. How does that help someone's career? A lot of our listeners are still climbing the corporate ladder. They're trying to figure out where to go. They're trying to uncover where maybe future opportunities in a related field might be. And yet they don't get involved with different organizations because they're not sure how that's going to benefit them. You've spent your career being involved with people and building those connections and sharing best practices.
Yeah.
So I thought you would be great to interview about why does it even matter? Why should you be involved in your industry?
Well, okay, this is maybe not a crisp answer, but when I started, networking was achieved in these conferences, right? I mean, I was in the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. That was where aerospace engineers went, right? And if you wanted to learn about aerodynamics or controls of aircraft, that's the place you went. Now, there were a couple other fringe societies, but that was the main one. And there wasn't any other place to go other than that group, what they published, and then they started having face-to-face conferences, right? We're talking the 1970s into the early 80s. So part of the reason you need to do it is just to become aware of what else is going on in your industry, especially if you're in a innovation group where you're trying to come up with a new way of doing something. So it's just doing thorough scientific research, right? We all were taught in school. You go do your research, you figure out if somebody else has invented this thing and see if you can either license it or come up with a better idea. So part of it is that's what you're supposed to do. Then as the world's evolved and we've got these other forums, standards come about. And I early in my career, I was involved in a couple of them that became what are now called ISO standards. And I found some of that work interesting because you could hear different perspectives. I found a lot of it really, really tiresome and unproductive because it's a very diplomatic and sometimes a bit political to get to conclusions. But that was an insight. And again, without a standard, how could two companies build similar products and where it doesn't matter or you don't compete, still, assure a safe product to a customer? So standards are important, at least interchange standards, interface standards. And so, first it's the scientific method, be thorough in your research. Second, it's get standards where it makes sense from business's point of view. And then I think the next one is what I learned about private companies. So companies that make a profit for shareholders and make consumer products. The really good ones, what they figure out is what their competitive advantage is, and everything else you want to normalize. And what I mean by that is you want your competitor to do it as well or no better than you do, right? And so what's the best way to do that? Well, it's an open forum where you can exchange on standards and practices. So more than just the interface, but also the method. And those, the Society of Automotive Engineers is a great example of that for the car industry. And so we talked about not just how we interface two different products, but we also talked about what's the proper way to test something. And then as simulation became more and more prevalent in our jobs, what's the proper way to simulate? What's a good enough correlation and what needs to be a more accurate correlation? And so these are all journeys, steps where groups of people getting together were always more powerful than by ourselves. Probably the earliest thing that happened to me that convinced me about groups was, my design project, a capstone project in college. We formed a team and we purposely formed it with different disciplines. So a couple of us were aerospace engineers. One was an industrial designer and a couple others were mechanical guys. We had one chemical guy. And we were encouraged to do that by our professors, but we learned a lot more from each other because we were coming from different education backgrounds and different perspectives, right? So I had hoped, and I think it's very true, that you see the same thing in industry as you proceed. Now, the last 15 years, computers have gotten really inexpensive, and there's all kinds of PLM vendors, and we've talked to some of them on our show here, and it's difficult to make sense of it all. right? I spent a lot of time trying to make sense of, why do I want this fluid dynamics code versus that fluid dynamics code, or why do I want vendor A who's integrated or acquired some company versus vendor B who just does open source of everything. And it's complicated. And I think, like many things that evolve, it's kind of the wild, wild west, where you get all kinds of innovation, and then you get some normalization going on to really focus on what matters. So how do you find out what matters? And you shouldn't be myopic and think you know it all, because you never do. And so this collaboration amongst companies to understand the best way to apply, for instance, the Siemens tool set, or what was originally the Unigraphics tool set. I learned that if I could get a couple big companies together, we would probably help each other out, especially if we weren't competitors. So how do you do that? Well, you do different industries, right?
Sure.
An aero company, an auto company, an equipment company, things like that. So that collaboration also just surprised me at how well that worked. And that's where PLM World came in, is I got invited by one of those other companies to come to a meeting and say, well, we'd like to work with you guys at General Motors because we're trying to figure out how to solve a particular industrial problem, right? And we're wondering, is it the PLM tool set, or do you have to do it another way? And that led to all kinds of exchanges back and forth. And the two of us that started it, then we added other people over the next couple of years. Again, we had some pretty strict ground rules about secrecy and being frank with the tool vendor, but also respecting what the tool vendor fed back about what was difficult or easy or whatever. A lot of the times it was us, the OEMs, that were causing the problem because we wouldn't agree on priority of requirements. We'd all be arrogant and say, well, you do it my way, or I'm not going to give you the next contract. Well, you do that enough, you get a real mess in the tool chain. So collaborations work. And then, where you and I met, Tom, at PLM World, well, I got encouraged to get into one of the working groups a few years earlier. And at first I thought, oh, this is just another responsibility. I don't know that I want it. And then to my surprise, after I sat through the first meeting, it was actually guys from a big aircraft company. They're like, yeah, you guys in the car business, you drive the decisions because of your volume, with a volume of tools we use. But in fact, here are the important problems. And they explained them. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you got a good point. Those are actually more important than the problems we were pushing at the time. So I think hearing other talented people, PLM leaders at other companies, in this case, helped me improve my understanding of how's best to help the tool vendors evolve their solutions. And at first they were reluctant. There's still some of the leadership I think didn't like what we were doing, but there was another group that said it was really helpful that we just aligned the requirements, right? We want to do better simulations for noise and vibe, because we all have noise and vibration issues, right? And some of it, like car companies, it was all about pleasability. Other people, it was about a safety thing. It was just too noisy. They had to design a better widget. So I think the collaborations, what I'd encourage the listeners to remember is, if you're not collaborating in some broader group, you're missing a golden opportunity to learn. And then if you get into one or two of them that you're not learning anything, well, gracefully dismiss yourself and go find another one. They're out there. And I got pretty frustrated, about mid-career with some of them, and I just disengaged. And I don't think I made a mistake. It was the right choice for me. But some activities are not about pushing the science or pushing the evolution of products. And I think this comes to your fundamental beliefs. What is it you're trying to do as an engineer? And I want to contribute to better and better products for consumers, right? That's why I went to the car business after my first decade in the aircraft business, right? It's more, some people disagree with me, but it's more satisfying, because if it works, you guys buy our cars in the marketplace. If it doesn't work, you buy somebody else's cars.
So, Greg, I'm going to interrupt
you. But never mind, we shouldn't go there. But yeah, we will. What are you driving still? You still driving a Mustang?
I still drive a Mustang. I know you.
Are you driving an electric Mustang yet?
Not yet. I'm still guzzling the gas in mine. But I know you're a GM guy, but I'm a Ford guy. But I will tell you.
You really, on a side note, Tom, you really do need to take a e-Mustang for a drive. That thing's like a rocket when it takes off.
I bet it would be fun just to drive it, just because mine is 7 years old. I bet that just driving the new one and driving the electric one would be fun. But you just said a lot of stuff. So there's a couple things I want to go back and unpack for the audience a little bit about why it is so important to be involved with groups. I am a real big believer in being involved with trade associations, no matter what it is. As a professional speaker, I've been very involved in the National Speakers Association. I think that when you get around people who are doing similar type things to you and you make real friendships, it makes it a lot easier to answer the tough questions that come along. And you basically said that in what you were saying. The other thing is I live in Austin, Texas, and it's a very tech-focused town. And I'm a real big believer that the companies should participate in the big tech organizations that exist, because when you build community and collaborate, everybody wins. But when I talk about this, everybody gets real excited about collaboration. We all like the idea of collaboration because that sounds like win-win. But you can't get to collaboration if you don't have community. And community doesn't happen by accident. You have to get involved, show up, participate, listen, share, realize you're not going to win every argument. But where I want to go back to is, you said you started this like when you were doing your college level work. Did you have a mentor or anyone along the way who gave you the advice about building relationships, networking, and getting involved in the community?
It wasn't that direct. It's a really good question. Now, a lot of engineering schools have capstone projects that require cross-discipline work. So I think in a lot of schools, I know Purdue is this way too. MIT is for sure this way. That you're required. It's about 9 credits where I went to school. You're required to do that as a part of that, and part of that is teaching you to bridge across your silo, your expertise. So I think you get exposure, like any good education, to something that works, and then it self-propagates. You're like, oh, I didn't expect that, right? And so now all of a sudden you say, okay, well, I'll tuck that away into my experience, and let's see what the next time I can apply that, right? One of my things that frankly frustrated me with military work or government contracting work is some of it's pretty secret, right? And so it's a lot more difficult to collaborate, at least about the details of your job, because you can't talk about it, right? Car guys, yeah, we're competitive, but stuff isn't that secret, right? I mean, it might be secret how we do a catalytic converter coating, but we all do catalytic converters to manage emissions with internal combustion engines, right? It's just the state of the art. So actually, I said that there's a couple exceptions. Those guys are even better at it because they don't need a catalytic converter. But my point is you said it well. You got to build the community. You got to invest in the community so that when you need it, when the stuff hits the fan, and these days it feels like it's hitting the fan every week. It's that broader network that you can rely on about, well, how are you guys solving this problem, or are you even bothering solving this problem? Has some other priority taken over? The push to green, if we didn't have a push to green, by that I mean cleaner technologies in your products, the current oil prices are going to drive it. And there's economists in the car companies that have known this for decades, that if you get gas prices this high, we will shift to electric, right? So the shift is coming. And what's good about it is, you used to have to compromise range, right? Right now, that looks to be solved thanks to innovative things going on with battery density, energy density in the batteries. And so that's really cool. And I think a lot of us in another 10 years, we won't look back. We'll be driving electric vehicles of one sort or another. And at least tailpipe emissions will go away because we won't have that kind of thing anymore. That wouldn't have been possible without a collaboration. And it took a combination of maybe the right set of crises along with this community of people that know how to work together. The guys I worked with the last 10 years, a couple of them reach out now and then. I ran into one recently at a conference in Washington, and it was nice to catch up. And then a terrible accident occurred with one of them. He injured his part of his body, and he couldn't give a speech. Well, we had worked enough together over the years. I was able to, I'm sure I didn't do it well enough, but I was able to present his material. Mm-hmm. And it's because we had worked together on similar topics, though our two companies were very different industries. And so that's how you know you got a well-working community, is where you got each other's back. And
you bring up another.
Go ahead.
You bring up another interesting point with that, hey, you'd worked together, you knew him, and he had a tragedy come along, and you were able to step up and help. But that also reminds me that when you're involved in your industry and you're known because you're writing papers, you're appearing on podcasts like being a guest on Digital Enterprise Society podcast, or you're presenting at conferences, other opportunities come your way. As you've gone through what is an eclectic career, do you think that you've had more career advancement because you've been one of these people who's been involved with others? Do you think it helped you grow your career?
Well, it for sure gave you the practice to look at different perspectives. And I think career growth, career success in these crazy times we live in comes from being flexible. So having a broader perspective helps, right? There's a lot of people that when they come out of school, they think they're going to be the best mechanical engineer ever. And as long as we're building, things that go into an internal combustion engine, they'll be set for life. Guess what? Expensive fuel. and now we got electric motors that, well, they've always been efficient. We just needed a battery pack that could go more than 400 miles, right? And so all of a sudden your expertise won't be in piston rings. It'll be in making sure a motor or a battery lasts, that it's durable, right? And so I guess I think the broader perspective helps. And some of us that's our game. That's what we excel at. We like the broader view. So the people who are specialists, well, I think we need you. You just got to be careful that, at least in the commercial companies, that the thing you specialize in doesn't become less important. I mean, my goodness, look at conventional telephones or old film cameras. You and I are old enough to remember them, but there's a lot of people that don't anymore. These whole worlds were changed by, computers. I mean, you don't imagine listening to a tune on your, whatever your device is, other than a digital file. And that digital file replaced tape, it replaced records, LPs. And so computers will do the same thing. This raises an interesting debate. I said it. We're in the age of lots of computers. Well, then, will the meta world replace the real world? Well, I surely hope not. but
again, that's a whole other discussion that we can have.
Zooming for 3 years, we've now figured out that we can do a lot of things via Zoom.
Well, I mean, you and I have been doing this podcast now for 3 years, and you live in Michigan and I live in Texas, and we get together every week and we have conversations with interesting people from all over the world, which leads me to another question. Okay. You've been very connected to people internationally, and you've done that through your involvement in many of these groups that you've been involved with, including PLM World, now Digital Enterprise Society. So how can people build their network outside of just their company or their direct community?
Yeah, I was just lucky to be candid. I worked for a global company, right? And at least in my formative years, we partnered with Fiat at one point. We partnered with others around the world. There's even in the news today, you can read about a partnership growing with Honda, right? And so some of the cross-cultural exposed to more parts of the world happened just because of my job assignments. I think it's hard to go international without the support of your company. I mean, it can become expensive pretty quickly, right? So when you have that opportunity to bridge across an ocean, then you should take advantage of it. And certainly I was able to do that as we, the thing we did, we focused on, we rolled it from the Detroit area to the Rhine Valley to other parts of the world. And, and the last one was into Shanghai. And today there are people that I can say I helped them build the thing that they now are operating as a successful business. And so that's very satisfying. But it, if you asked, well, which international organizations should you embrace? Oh, that's a difficult question. There's so many to choose from. You kind of got to ask frankly, the graybeards, well, what do you think? Where should we invest? And there isn't a right answer, by the way. There's just practices that we have where it worked with one group and maybe didn't work with another. I do think it's getting harder because we've been so good at making computers pervasive. It's getting harder to figure out, well, will my time invested in one group pay off versus another group? A lot of it's your gut feel, at least for me it was. And if there's something being accomplished, then it's worth sticking it out. If it's just turning into a debating society and you don't know if you're going to be there for each other when times get tough, well, there's only so many hours in the day. You might have to make, and I did this, you might make the choice to just not be involved anymore.
Well, you brought that up earlier, that you get involved with a group and you test it. And if it works and you're making the right contacts and it's helping you advance your career, you stick around. Maybe you get on a committee, maybe you serve on the board. If it's not, you can move on, but that doesn't mean you should shut down and not be involved with the next group. Now, Greg, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and there's one thing I really wanted to get to because I think it's really important in this idea of why individuals should get involved with these industry groups, these standard boards, private networking groups that people put together. One reason I think it's really important is it's not just about us. We have to build the bridge to the next generation. And I think that oftentimes when we get involved with these groups, we get involved because we want to grow our careers. But when we get up to the higher echelons of that career, we have to remember to send that elevator back down and help the people below us. So what are some of the things that you've seen both as a younger person coming up and now as a little bit more seasoned gray on the top, helping others? Why being involved in whatever type of organization within your industry, why being involved helps that generation to generation pass of the baton?
Well, the first thing early in my career, so I'm a couple years out of school, I'm doing my thing. We're living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And we had a client, a very big company, and they visited us in a project review. And there's 3 people came to the meeting from the client: a very senior person, a very talented but inexperienced person, and then kind of the middle manager. And I remember to this day what the senior person said, which he says, "Oh, I'm just here to mentor the project manager, and more importantly, this younger guy who's really smart, but he doesn't know the limits of our company's capabilities." And just the mere fact that he acknowledged, I'm not the king. I am well respected. I'm highly paid. However, I'm here to mentor the execution of the project, and more importantly, the new talent. And that's hung with me for years. And so when I got a chance to do the same thing, whether it was hiring the next group of people, I'm very proud that there are people I hired that are still at General Motors, and they're all in senior leadership positions. I'm very proud of that accomplishment, right? I think the same thing happens in our industry forums like PLM World. The current PLM World, or if you will, Digital Enterprise Society leadership of the user groups, Adam and the team, they're the next generation. And we interacted with them as we, the old PLM World Board, were going through this evolution with Siemens on how the event was going to run. And we got our upcoming event, first time that we're doing it kind of independent of Siemens here this summer. And it's the same thing. So you got to realize that leaving a mark, as you get older, you want to do this, right? It's not about you leaving something that people can look at. It's more about, did you leave it, the passion you have in somebody else's mind so that they can pick up where you left off and carry it on. And, it's easier. It's really important too, to do this with the young generation, right? It's easier because the ones that really want to learn, they're attentive. They'll listen and they'll follow, and they'll appreciate being picked up when they make a mistake, and they'll move on to the next one. So as a human being, human to human, we both get satisfaction from that. First, helping each other, and then second, knowing that, well, my mark is left in the people that came after me, right? And hopefully I taught them something useful, and they'll remember, and they'll teach the next generation.
So if some younger people are listening to that and they're like, what are these users groups that you speak of within Digital Enterprise Society? how can people find out about what Digital Enterprise Society has to offer people who are, working in this industry?
Yeah. So PLM World as an event has been around over 4 decades, right? And up until a few years ago, a lot of these conferences were user driven, and by that I mean volunteers, very open, and so people submitted papers, and there was a peer review that decided which papers got presented based upon their value to the broad industries, right? I wanted to point that out because in today's world, and maybe it's since 2000, the last 10 years here, in today's world, a lot of our events are very company focused, right? Which by the way, isn't bad. You can still have exchanges of like-minded folks using the same tools, but that peer review of maybe a paper that is thought-provoking but may not be such favorable in the light of a solution vendor, it may not make the light of day, and that's where a group like the Digital Enterprise Society can come in. We still need to have these discussions, right, about efficiency and cross-discipline collaboration, and is it happening on its own, or is it I had a recent debate about it's the PLM way or the highway, and there was a bunch of ALM people, application lifecycle management people, in the discussion, and one of the people in the ALM side just said, well, PLM is, as a practice for release and configuration management, so on, you're about 30 years old in terms of being done by lots of people. ALM is about 50 years old. So maybe you should mind your senior members when we're trying to point out to you about change management and configuration management and agility and flexibility. We can teach each other a lot is the point, as opposed to one group saying, well, we got to figure it out, do it my way or else. There's a reason why the other group has their things. And, we've touched on it today. It really does come back to listening, understanding that different perspective and trying to build a bridge between them where it makes sense to build a bridge. So I think it's really important to get involved, and it's hard, but it's worth your time to figure out where to stay involved, where it's effective, either because you're influencing the next generation or because you're still learning something. Or if you're really lucky, you're doing both at the same time.
Well, Craig, thank you so much for stepping to the other side of the microphone and being the guest on today's episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Any last words?
Well, let's make sure we see as many of you as possible at the Digital Enterprise Society event here in July. I forget the exact date. I'm sorry, Tom, but I know it's about 4 or 5 weeks off. So I hope to see people here at least in the Detroit area. The event's going to be here, and so Adam and the team are getting ready to put together a pretty interesting day, especially coming out of the pandemic. It is time to get back together and catch up with each other.
Yeah, I think, and I'm using my brain here, and it's not always totally clear. I think it's July 22nd, but people can check on that by going to digitalenterprisesociety.org and find out more information. But again, Craig, thanks for being here. Thank you so much for everybody who tuned in and listened. We want you to join us here every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and actionable information on growing your career in project lifecycle management. Hey, I'll tell you what, here's the other thing. Go to the website, digitalenterprisesociety.org right now and check out everything that we've got going on. And we'll see you next week, where we'll be back with another episode.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.